Yeah, so I want to, like, there's so many different things to talk about here, but like maybe the first one is to talk a little bit about what it's not good at, because the last thing that I think we want to do is give people the impression that it is an AGI, that it is perfect, that there isn't a lot of additional work that has to happen to improve it and make it better. You mentioned math as one of the things, and so I thought maybe let's talk a little bit about what you think needs to be better about these systems over time and where we need to focus our energy.
Yeah, so it appears to be a general issue that it's knowledge of context when it's being asked, okay, I tell you something and I generate something. Humans understand, oh, I'm making up fantasy stuff here, or I'm giving you advice that if it's wrong, you're going to buy the wrong stock or, take the wrong drug. And so humans have a very deep context of what's going on. Even the AI's ability to know that you've switched context, like if you're asking it to tell jokes and then you ask it a serious question, where a human would sort of see from your face or the nature of that change that, okay, we're not in that joking thing. It wants to keep telling jokes. Yes. You almost have to do the reset sometimes to get it out of the, hey, whatever I bring up, just make jokes about it. And so I do think that sense of context, there's work. It also, in terms of how hard it should work on a problem, when you and I see a math problem, we know, wow, I may have to apply simplification 5 or 6 times to get this into the right form. And so, we're kind of looping through how we do these reductions, whereas today, the reasoning is a sort of linear chain of descent through the levels. And if simplification needs run 10 times, it probably won't. So, math is a very abstract type of reasoning. And right now, I'd say that's the greatest weakness. Weirdly, it can solve lots of math problems. And there are some math problems where if you ask it to explain it in an abstract form, make essentially an equation or a program that matches the math problem, it does that perfectly, and you could pass that off to a normal solver. Whereas if you tell it to do the numeric work itself, it often makes mistakes. And it's very funny because sometimes it's very confident that, hey, or it'll say, oh, I mistyped. Well, in fact, there's not a typewriter anywhere in this scene. So the notion of mistyping is really very weird. And so, whether these current areas of weakness, it's 6 months, a year, or 2 years before those largely get fixed. So we have a serious mode where it's not, just making up URLs. And then we have a more fanciful mode. There's some of that already being done largely through prompts and eventually through training. And, training it for math, there may be some special training that needs to be done. But these problems, I don't think are fundamental. And, there are people who think, oh, it's statistical. Therefore it can never do X. That is nonsense. Every example they give of a specific thing it doesn't do, wait a few months. And it's very good. So characterizing how good it is, the people who say it's crummy are really wrong. And the people who think this is AGI, they're wrong. And those of us in the middle are just, trying to make sure it gets applied in the right way. There's a lot of activities like, helping somebody with their college application. What's my next step? What haven't I done? I have the following symptoms that are in fact, far within the boundary of things that it can do quite effectively.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit about this notion of it being able to use tools to assist it in reasoning. And I'll give you an example from this weekend with my daughter. So my daughter had this assignment where she had this list of 115 vocabulary words. and she had written a 1,000-word essay, and her objective was to use as many of these vocabulary words as she reasonably could in this 1,000-word essay, which is sort of a ridiculous assignment on the surface, right? But she had written this essay, and she was going through this list, trying to manually figure out like what her, tally was on this, vocabulary list, and it was boring, and she was like, all right, like I want the shortcut here, like, Dad, can you get me a Chat GPT account, and can I just put this in there and it will do it for me? And we did it, and Chat GPT, which is not running the GPT-4 model, but I don't think GPT-4 would have gotten this right either. Didn't quite get it right. Like, it was not precise. But the thing then that I got her to do with me is I was like, well, let's let ChatGPT write a little Python program that can very precisely, I mean, like, this is a very simple intro CS problem here. And like, the fact that the Python code for solving that problem was perfect and I got my solution immediately, like, it's just amazing. And like, my 14-year-old daughter, who doesn't program, understood everything that was going on. I don't know, like, if you've reflected much over these past months about, because essentially when we are trying to solve a complicated math problem, we've got a head full of cognitive tools that we pick up, like these abstractions that you're talking about, to help us break down, like, very complicated problems into smaller, less complicated problems that we can solve. And like, I think it's a very interesting idea to think about how these systems will be able to do that with code.
Yeah, it's so good at writing. That's just a mind-blowing thing. But, when you can use natural language, like, say, for a drawing program that you want various objects and you want to change them in certain ways, sure, you still want the menus there to touch up the colors, but the primary interface for creating a from-scratch drawing will be language. And if you want a document summarized, that's something that, it can do extremely well. And so when you have large bodies of texts, when you have text creation problems, there was a ChatGPT thing where a doctor who has to write to insurance companies to explain why he thinks something should be covered, that's very complicated. And it was super helpful. Now, he was reading that letter over to make sure it was right. In ChatGPT 4, we took the version 4 stuff, we took complex medical bills and we said, please explain this bill to me. What is this? And how does it relate to my insurance policy? And it was so incredibly helpful at being able to do that. Explaining concepts in a more simpler form. It's very, very helpful at that. And so there's going to be a lot of tasks where there's just huge increased productivity, including a lot of documents, payables, accounts receivables. Just take the health system alone. There's a lot of documents that now software will be able to characterize them very effectively.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I wanted to chat with you about, like, you have this really unique perspective in your involvement in several of the big inflection points in technology. So for two of these inflections, like, you were either like, one of the primary architects of the inflection itself, or, like one of the big leaders. So like, we wouldn't have the PC, personal computing ecosystem without you. And like, you played like a really substantial role in getting the internet available to everybody, and making it a ubiquitous technology that everyone can benefit from. To me, this feels like another one of those moments where a lot of things are going to change. And, I wonder, what your advice might be to, people who are thinking about, like, oh, I have this new technology that's amazing that I can now use. Like, how should they be thinking about how to use it? Like, how should they be thinking about the urgency with which they are, pursuing these new ideas? And and like, how does that relate to how you thought about things in the PC era and the internet era?